Little girl helped the CEO pick up papers until he saw a family heirloom bracelet on her tiny wrist. This story will break your heart, and slowly, gently put it back together. If you've ever wondered what it means to be forgiven, to be chosen again, stay with us. And before we begin, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. The wind rolled hard through Midtown just after lunch, snatching at the edges of Julian Cross's leather folder like a thief in a hurry. He had just stepped out of the Hamilton Hotel where he had wrapped up a closed-door briefing with investors. His tailored charcoal suit clung sharp to his frame lapels, fluttering in the sudden gust. He barely had time to brace when the contents of his folder flew into the street like startled doves, documents, charts, printed research summaries, all of them snatched and scattered across the sidewalk and curb. Julian swore under his breath, crouching instinctively to catch the ones closest to his feet. Around him, people in coats and scarves bustled past, too busy or uninterested to help. Manhattan at its finest. The world kept moving, except for one pair of small hands. "I'll help," said a voice. It was small and certain, and came from about knee-height. Julian looked over, startled, and saw her. A little girl, maybe 5 or 6, crouched beside him in a pale blue hoodie and canvas sneakers with red stars. Her hair was in 2 messy braids that swung forward as she bent to carefully stack his papers into a neat pile. Her fingers were quick but precise eyes, squinting in concentration. One of her braids kept falling in front of her face, and she blew at it with practiced annoyance. Julian hesitated, then murmured, "Thank you." He sounded almost surprised. The girl looked up and grinned like it was no big deal. "You dropped a lot," she said matter-of-factly, handing him a crumpled bar graph printout. "Are these important somewhat?" Julian said, brushing them off and trying to restore some order. He couldn't help but notice how meticulously she handled each page. She was serious about the task. He accepted the last bundle from her small hands, and just as he did, he noticed something that knocked the breath from his lungs. A gold bracelet dangled loosely on her wrist, peeking from beneath the cuff of her sleeve. The sun caught it just right, and something in Julian's chest twisted. It was not the bracelet itself, though it was delicate, elegant, the kind worn by women with taste, but the charm hanging from it. A tiny engraved crest, the Cross family emblem shaped like a stylized feather wrapped around a key. It had once belonged to his sister. Julian's voice caught in his throat. He stared. The charm was unmistakable. Only one bracelet like that had ever existed, a one-of-a-kind heirloom passed from their grandmother to his sister when she turned 16. When Claire vanished, so had the bracelet. He forgot the folder. He forgot the papers. All he could see was that charm swinging ever so slightly as the girl shifted her hand. "Where did you get that?" he asked more sharply than he intended. The girl tilted her head. "This?" She held her wrist up with a nonchalant shrug. "It's my bracelet. My mommy gave it to me. She said it used to belong to her sister." Julian's world staggered. His fingers went numb. He looked at the child again, really looked, and suddenly her features were not just childlike but familiar. The shape of her nose, the slope of her cheek, and those eyes, blue, cold blue, just like Claire's. "What's your name?" He asked, the words barely coming out. She smiled. "Nora," she said proudly, then turned and pointed across the street. "My mom's in that shop. She's getting me a muffin. She says Wednesdays are muffin days." Julian followed her finger to the glass door of a small cafe tucked into the corner of the street. He could see the counter inside the back of a woman leaning forward talking to the barista. A soft blouse. Dark hair. Julian rose slowly. Nora had already turned to skip toward the crosswalk, carefree, not noticing that the man she had just helped was standing perfectly still, as if the world had dropped out beneath him. The bracelet, the name, the face. He had not seen Elena Voss in 6 years. They had worked together closely during the toughest stretch of his company's growth. She had been his right hand in public relations, his shield during investor scandals, his fixer, his confidant. One night, just one, they crossed that invisible line. It was after the funeral after Claire's disappearance had been officially ruled accidental. Julian had been drunk. Elena had been there. They had not spoken of it again. A week later, she quit. She sent a formal resignation email turned in her badge and was gone before Julian had even returned from a conference in Zurich. He had accepted it at the time. He was grieving, numb, emotionally unavailable. The lines between them had blurred and snapped, and he let it all slide into the past like so many other things. But now here she was, with a child who wore his sister's bracelet, a child named Nora. Claire had once said she loved that name. Julian crossed the street without thinking. The inside of the cafe was warm, smelling faintly of cinnamon and espresso. Elena stood near the counter, her profile angled slightly away, hair pulled into a low twist. She was thinner than he remembered, sharper around the eyes, but still carried the same quiet command that once captivated boardrooms. He stepped through the door. She turned at the sound. Her eyes landed on him and the color drained from her face. For a long second, no one moved. "Time that fragile, slippery thing seemed to freeze," Elena Julian said. She didn't speak. Her gaze dropped instinctively to Nora, who had just bounded through the door and wrapped her arms around her mother's waist. "Mommy?" I helped the man pick up his papers. He was really surprised. Oh, and he liked my bracelet. Julian saw the moment it happened. The instant Elena's eyes met his again and understood. She went still. Her arm came to rest on Nora's back. Protective, grounding. "Where did she get that bracelet?" Julian asked again softly this time. Elena looked at her daughter, then back at Julian. Her voice was quiet. It belonged to Claire. He felt his lungs tighten. "Why does your daughter have it?" Elena's expression flickered. For a moment she seemed to war with herself. Then she motioned toward a small table near the window. "Let's sit." They sat. Julian's hands trembled slightly as he rested them on the table. Nora busied herself with a sugar packet, humming a song under her breath. Outside, the wind kept blowing. Julian's voice came low. "Is she Claire's?" Elena didn't speak at first. Then she nodded, eyes fixed on her coffee cup. "Claire gave birth 6 years ago. She never told your father. She never told anyone but me. She was planning to leave. We were going to raise her together. And then the accident happened. The one no one investigated properly." Julian stared. "Why didn't you tell me I tried?" she said, her voice sharper now. "I sent a letter. I emailed your office. I called your assistant. I never got past your gatekeepers. Then I realized maybe you didn't want to know. Maybe you never did." Julian leaned back, stunned. "I didn't know. I swear to you, Elena, I never knew." She nodded once tightly. "I believe you now. But it's been 6 years. I've raised her as my own. She knows me as her mother. Claire asked me to protect her, and I have." Nora looked up suddenly. "Are you sad?" she asked Julian, tilting her head. He tried to smile but couldn't quite manage it. "A little," he said truthfully. Elena's shoulders dropped, just slightly. They sat in silence for a long time. Then Julian whispered, "I want to know her." Elena looked at him. The quiet between them stretched taut and trembling. "That's not up to you," she said. "That's going to be up to her." Julian nodded, eyes never leaving the little girl, tracing circles in the condensation on the window. The bracelet shimmered faintly on her wrist, catching light, catching memory, catching history. Outside, the city roared. But inside that cafe, the past had just come back to life, and nothing would be the same. The wind had quieted by the time they stepped out of the cafe, but the silence between them carried its own chill. Julian held the door open as Elena and Nora exited, though neither of them acknowledged the gesture. Nora tugged at her mother's hand, still humming quietly to herself, unaware that the man walking beside them was unraveling on the inside. Julian watched the bracelet dance against her wrist, with every step a pendulum of memory slicing through the carefully buried vaults of his past. Claire had vanished 6 years ago, and now, here was her daughter walking with all the life and joy that had once belonged to the sister he'd never truly gotten to say goodbye to. They stopped at the corner, waiting for the light to change. Julian glanced sideways at Elena, trying to read her expression, but she had perfected her walls. Years of press conferences and boardroom ambushes had made her a master of the composed mask. Still, something in the set of her jaw told him she was just barely holding it together. "Elena," he said quietly. She didn't look at him. "Why didn't you tell me?" Later, after she was born, she inhaled sharply, eyes fixed on the crossing signal. "I did. I wrote a letter. I sent it by courier to your building. You had already left for Geneva. I tried calling. I tried showing up. I was always intercepted by one of your people. Your father made sure I stayed on the other side of the glass." My father, Julian, blinked. "He knew I don't know how much he knew," she said slowly. "But I do know he kept me out. And when I saw the look in his eyes that last time I tried to reach you, I understood what Claire had meant. She always said he would bury any truth that didn't fit the family narrative. She was right." The light turned green. They crossed. Julian walked in silence for a long moment. Why didn't Claire tell me she was pregnant? Elena exhaled more a breath of pain than frustration. Because she didn't want you to feel responsible. She knew what you were going through. She knew you were still grieving your mother, and she said you were already shutting down, closing off. She didn't want to add more weight. "She should have told me anyway." Julian murmured more to himself than to her. "I would have. You would have what Elena cut in gently. Come running. Raised a child while running a biotech empire and fighting your father's legacy. You couldn't even say goodbye at the funeral, Julian. You stood by the casket like it was a photo op." Julian stopped walking. "That's not fair." "No," she said, facing him fully now. "It's not. But it's true." Nora tugged at Elena's coat. "Mommy, are we going home? Soon, baby?" Elena said, softening immediately as she turned back to her daughter. She reached down and brushed a strand of hair from Nora's forehead. "Why don't you walk ahead a little, okay? Just to the bench with the pigeons. I'll be right behind you." Nora nodded and skipped off toward the bench, leaving the two adults once again suspended in the wreckage of words unspoken. Julian's voice was lower now. "I don't want to fight with you." "Then don't," Elena said. "But don't pretend this is simple. You walked away from everything, Julian. Not just me. Not just Claire. From all of it. And now you want to come back like this is a boardroom you can fix with the right pitch." "That's not what I'm doing," he said quickly. "I'm not here for closure. I'm here because I looked into that little girl's eyes and saw my sister. I saw something I didn't even know I was still mourning. I'm not asking for forgiveness or even for a place in your lives. He trailed off. "I just need to know her." Elena looked at him for a long moment. Her face softened slightly, but the weariness didn't leave. "I don't know what that looks like. She thinks I'm her mother. And I am. In every way that matters. I held her when she cried through fevers. I taught her how to hold a crayon. I showed her how to braid. She doesn't know who Claire really was. She just knows her as someone who went to the stars. That's what we told her when she started asking." Julian felt something collapse inside him, gentle but devastating. Claire, to the stars. It was such a childlike interpretation of death, and yet somehow it was perfect. "She deserves to know," he said finally. "She deserves peace," Elena replied. "And right now you are a storm." That silenced him. And for a moment they both watched Nora feeding crumbs to the pigeons as if the world hadn't just shifted on its axis. Later that night, Julian sat in his office with the lights dimmed, staring at a photo of Claire from 15 years ago. She was wearing that same bracelet, laughing mid-spin in a white dress on the family lawn back before the house was sold, and the trees were cut down for someone else's estate plan. He remembered the way she had always believed in impossible things. That she wanted to study astronomy, not law. That she kept a journal full of questions she never dared to ask aloud. That she loved Elena like a sister, maybe more. He stood and walked to the liquor cabinet, then paused. Instead, he grabbed the old wooden box Claire had once given him. Inside was her high school class ring, a dried petal from their mother's funeral bouquet, and a folded note in Claire's handwriting. He unfolded it slowly. It read in her loopy teenage scrawl, "If I ever disappear, don't look for me in the obvious places. Look for the ones who knew me better than I knew myself." Julian stared at the note until the words blurred. The next morning he stood outside the community center where Elena worked. It was a small brick building tucked between a laundromat and a closed-down bookstore, the kind of place that got overlooked unless you were looking for it. He waited, unsure if she'd even acknowledge him. She walked out around 9 holding a clipboard and coffee. She stopped when she saw him. "You don't give up," she said. "Never have," Julian said. "I just took longer than I should have." Elena sighed and walked past him. "Walk with me." They walked along the sidewalk in silence for a block before she spoke again. "Do you know why I never had children of my own?" she asked. Julian shook his head. "Because I was afraid," she said. "Afraid I'd mess it up, that I'd love them too much and lose them. But when Claire gave me Nora, I didn't get to choose. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me." He nodded slowly. "She's amazing." "She is," Elena agreed. "And she's yours too, in ways we haven't even figured out yet." They reached a small park. Nora was already there, seated at a picnic table drawing with crayons. She looked up and waved when she saw them. Julian waved back. His chest tightened again. "I'm not asking to rewrite the past," he said quietly. "I just want to be part of her story now. However, you'll let me." Elena studied him for a long moment. "Start small," she said. "Come back tomorrow. She's doing a science fair project. Something about ladybugs and probability. She could use a partner who knows numbers." He let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "I think I remember statistics." "I doubt it," Elena said dryly, "but she'll teach you." He looked at her. "Thank you." She nodded, then added, "But one mistake, Julian, and I'm gone. I won't let her be broken by this. I understand." "No," she said, "you don't, but maybe one day you will." He stood beside her in the sun as Nora scribbled lines of purple and orange across construction paper, oblivious to the cautious hope beginning to grow in the shadow of everything lost. Julian stayed for half an hour that day. He sat beside Nora and asked about her drawings. She explained them in excited tangents, veering from ladybugs to planets to the shape of clouds. He listened. Really listened. And when she looked up and smiled at him without fear, something inside him stitched together. He didn't leave with answers, but he left with a date. Tomorrow. For ladybugs. And in a world where he had once believed time only took things away, the idea of getting another day felt like a miracle. Julian arrived early the next morning, which was not something he was accustomed to doing outside of boardroom expectations. For most of his adult life, punctuality had been a performance of control, a symbol of command. But today it felt different. He wasn't early to impress anyone. He was early because he could not stop thinking about Nora. Her laugh, the lopsided way she held her crayon, the bracelet that danced on her wrist like it was tethered to another lifetime. He waited outside the community center, unsure if he should go in or hover. A small part of him feared Elena might change her mind. That maybe letting him into Nora's world had been a temporary decision made in the soft light of yesterday's calm. But then the door opened, and there she was. Nora wore a pink sweatshirt with a glittery heart across the chest, and in her arms was a folded trifold board covered in stickers, drawings, and blocks of text. Her expression was one of serious purpose, like a scientist heading into her final presentation. Elena followed behind her coffee and one-hand tote bag over the other shoulder, her expression unreadable, but not closed. Julian stepped forward. "Morning," he said, careful not to let too much expectation enter his voice. Nora's eyes lit up with something close to recognition. "You came back," she said, pleased. "Mommy said maybe you would, but she also said grown-ups get busy sometimes." "I was hoping you'd need an assistant," Julian replied, kneeling slightly to her level. "I do," she said seriously. "But only if you're good at ladybugs. I'm excellent at pretending to be," he said with a small smile. That earned him a giggle. "Okay, you can help. But I get to do the talking." "Deal," They walked the short distance to the library annex where the science fair tables had been set up. Julian carried the board. Nora led the way with the confidence of someone much older. She pointed to her assigned table and immediately began unpacking her materials, a plastic container with several tiny red and black speckled dots inside a stack of index cards and a small jar of fake grass. Julian looked at Elena. She was standing back, arms folded, loosely observing. There was a softness in her eyes today, like something uncertain but hopeful had taken root overnight. She didn't say anything, but when Julian glanced at her, she gave a small nod. It was not permission. It was acknowledgement. He turned his focus back to Nora, who was now explaining the principles of her experiment with the focus of a young professor. So I put ladybugs on the fake grass, and I watch if they go toward the sugar side or the no-sugar side, she said. I think they like sugar better. But I'm testing it 3 times a day for 5 days to make sure. That's called a repeated measure, Julian offered. Nora looked at him, eyebrows raised. You know science words. A few, he said modestly. She looked thoughtful. You can stay. He smiled and rolled up his sleeves. Over the next hour, Julian watched her interact with other children, field questions from a visiting teacher, and enthusiastically point out her hypothesis, which she pronounced in 3 distinct syllables like it was made of magic. He helped her tape a loose corner of her board and explained what a control group was using jelly beans as an example. She caught on quickly, nodding like she already knew that, but was letting him feel smart. At some point, Elena stepped outside to take a phone call, and Julian found himself alone with Nora, who was coloring a title banner for her project. Your hands look like hers, she said suddenly. Julian blinked. Who's my mom's sister? The one who went to the stars. Mommy showed me a picture once and she had your kind of hands. Long fingers. Sad knuckles. Sad knuckles, he repeated, caught off guard. Nora nodded as if that made perfect sense. They look like they're thinking too much. Julian didn't know what to say. So he said, She would have liked that you did this project. I think so too. Nora said softly. Then added, Did you know her? Julian hesitated. I did. Was she nice? She was more than nice, he said. She was brave. Funny. The kind of person who made everything feel like an adventure. Nora smiled at that, then returned to coloring. I wish I could have met her longer. He wanted to say she had, that every inch of her was stamped with Claire's spirit, but he held that thought unsure if it was his place. Later that afternoon, after the tables had been cleared and the children were trickling out with parents and teachers, Elna approached Julian near the front steps. Nora was across the street with a few other children chasing bubbles. She trusts you fast, Elena said without preamble. Julian turned to face her. I wasn't sure she would. She doesn't do that with many people, Elena continued. She's warm but cautious. The fact that she let you in so easily, it scares me. I know, he said. I'm scared too. Elena looked away for a moment, then back. I don't want to reopen old grief, Julian. Not for her, not for me, and certainly not for you. But I can't pretend this isn't happening. That you being here doesn't matter, because it does. It's changing something. He nodded slowly. Can I keep showing up? Let's see how tomorrow goes. That was enough, for now. In the days that followed, Julian became a fixture in Nora's routine, but always carefully. He never assumed. He waited for Elena to offer time, and when she did, he made the most of it. He took Nora to the botanical garden where she asked 100 questions about every single flower. He brought her a book on constellations which she read with awe, connecting stars in the sky with stories Claire used to tell him when they were children. And he listened. Really listened. When she asked about why people lie or what happens when people leave, he didn't deflect. He just answered with honesty and care. One Saturday afternoon, Julian met them at a corner cafe near the Riverwalk. Nora was already seated at a table, sipping hot chocolate with whipped cream on her nose. Elena sat across from her, flipping through a community newsletter. When Julian arrived, Nora waved and motioned to the seat beside her. I saved you the warm chair, she said. He smiled and sat. The three of them ordered pastries and talked about Nora's school play where she would be playing a sunflower. At one point, she excused herself to use the restroom, and Elena leaned in slightly. "She's been asking more questions," she said. "About Claire," he guessed. "About you. Where you came from. Why you weren't around when she was little." He swallowed. "What did you say I told her life is messy? That sometimes people take a long time to find their way home?" Julian nodded, the words catching somewhere deep in his throat. "She's not the only one trying to understand," Elena added, her voice quiet. "I still don't know what part you want to play in all this." "I don't either," he admitted. "But I know I'm not here to disappear again." Elena studied him for a long moment. "Good," she said finally. "Because if you did, I don't think either of us could explain that away." That night, Julian sat in his apartment staring out at the skyline, thinking not of the company he had spent half his life building, nor the legacy of the cross name, but of the way Nora had laughed when she called him a science guy, and how Elena had looked at him without flinching. He knew trust would take time. He knew mistakes could not be undone. But he also knew that something had shifted, not in theory, in practice, in presence, in every small moment that looked like nothing, but meant everything. Tomorrow, he would show up again, and the day after that, and maybe, just maybe one day soon, when Nora said, "This is my family," she would mean all of them, even him. Rain was falling in soft sheets when Julian stepped out of the cab onto the street in front of Elena's apartment building. The sky had been gray since morning, the kind of thick, moody gray that made everything feel slower, heavier. He hadn't planned to come by today. In fact, he had promised himself he would wait for Elena's invitation again to let her take the lead in setting boundaries. But earlier that afternoon, Nora had called him herself. Her voice was hushed, like she was sharing a secret, and she had said only one sentence before Elena had come back on the line. "Julian, will you come help me finish my robot?" Now he stood beneath the awning of the brick walk-up, holding a bag of pizza in one hand and a small wrapped box in the other. He had brought tools, too, the small kind he remembered Claire using when they were children, and she tried to build her own solar oven out of shoe boxes and aluminum foil. He wasn't sure how much help he would actually be, but he would try. Elena opened the door before he could knock. She was in leggings and a sweatshirt, hair pulled up in a loose knot face bare of makeup. She looked more tired than usual, but not surprised to see him. For a moment they stood there, neither quite knowing what to say. Julian lifted the pizza bag as a peace offering. She said she needed backup. Elena stepped aside wordlessly and let him in. The apartment was warm and smelled faintly of garlic and soap. Toys were scattered across the rug in the living room, books stacked in small, leaning towers near the couch. There was a worn throw draped over the arm of a chair and a basket of folded laundry half emptied on the floor. It was the kind of space that looked lived in, not curated. A place where things happened, a place with heart. Nora was in the corner, sitting on the floor surrounded by gears wires and cardboard pieces. She looked up and grinned when she saw him. "You brought tools," she said excitedly. "I did," he replied, kneeling down beside her, "though I'm not sure I remember how to use all of them." "That's okay," she said seriously. "I'm the boss. You're the assistant." Julian smiled and nodded. Understood. They worked for the next hour on the robot, which was more of a sculpture than a functioning machine, but had been clearly imagined with care. Nora explained its features with absolute certainty. The robot could water plants, find lost socks, and tell jokes, though so far it only blinked one eye and beeped when you pushed a button on its back. Julian held pieces while she taped tightened small screws when her fingers couldn't grip them, and offered ideas that she mostly rejected with polite authority. Elena watched from the kitchen sipping tea. She didn't interrupt, but her presence was a quiet constant. Once Julian looked up and caught her watching him. Their eyes met and something unspoken passed between them. She looked away first. Eventually, the robot was declared complete, given the name Sparklebot, and placed triumphantly on the windowsill. Nora washed her hands and sat cross-legged on the rug eating pizza straight from the box. Julian sat across from her, napkin in hand, letting her lead the conversation. "My teacher said we have to bring in someone who inspires us next week," Nora announced between bites. Julian raised an eyebrow. That sounds serious. It is, but I already know who I'm bringing. Oh, he asked, glancing at Elena, who had leaned against the doorframe, her expression wary. Nora nodded. You? Julian nearly dropped his slice. Elena straightened slightly. Nora, I mean it, the girl said, her voice certain. He's smart, and he helps even when it's hard. Like when the robot's head fell off. Julian tried to find words, but they stuck in his throat. Elena cleared her throat. We'll talk about it, sweetie. But I already signed the form, Nora said, cheerfully licking sauce from her thumb. And I told my teacher he wears suits, but he's nice anyway. Julian finally laughed a full surprise sound. Elena did not. Her expression was unreadable. Later, after Nora had gone to bed and the dishes had been cleaned, and the rain outside had softened to a gentle drizzle, Julian lingered near the kitchen table while Elena wiped down the counter. The silence between them stretched thin. She wants you to come, Elena said finally. I'd be honored, Julian replied, but only if you're comfortable with it. I don't know if I am, she said bluntly, setting the towel down. It's not that I don't see you trying. You are, and she adores you. But this isn't about effort. It's about permanence. Julian nodded slowly. You think I'll leave again? I think people revert to their patterns, she said, and you're used to control. You're used to keeping distance. You're doing well now, but what happens when something pushes too hard? When you're scared again? Julian stepped forward slightly. Then I stay. Even if I'm scared. Especially then. Elena looked at him. Her face was tired but open. You say that now, but I lived through your silence, Julian. I lived through that letter never being answered, through Claire's name disappearing from your lips like she never existed. I didn't know, he said. I swear to you, Elena, I never saw the letter. Then maybe the question is who made sure you didn't, she replied. That hung in the air like smoke. Julian exhaled slowly. My father. Elena nodded once. You always protected him, even when it cost you everything. Julian didn't argue. He could not. Not when the truth was so much uglier than he had ever let himself admit. When Claire disappeared, he said quietly, I believed what they told me, that it was an accident, that she had been reckless. But part of me never believed it. And I think he knew that. I think he wanted me to stop asking questions. Elena folded her arms. Do you want to start again? I don't know, he said. But I know I can't pretend anymore. Not about Claire, not about Nora, not about us. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned and opened a drawer. From it she pulled a small envelope, slightly yellowed edges, soft with time. She held it out. What is it? Julian asked. The letter I tried to send, she said. I wrote two. One I mailed, one I kept. Julian took it carefully as if it might fall apart. He did not open it yet. He looked at her instead. Thank you, he said. I didn't keep it for you, she said. I kept it because some part of me still needed to believe the truth would matter, even if it came late. He nodded. It does matter. She looked at the clock. It's late. You should go. He left quietly, the letter clutched in his hand like something sacred. The rain had stopped. The streets were glistening with reflection. In the cab, he unfolded the paper and read her words from 6 years ago. They were tender, honest, afraid. They told the story of a woman trying to honor her best friend's last wish, and a baby born with eyes like the brother who had vanished behind silence. They asked him to be brave, to choose differently than the men who came before him, to show up. When the cab reached his building, Julian sat for a long time before getting out. He looked out at the skyline, at all the lights in other people's windows. Then he looked back down at the letter. Maybe he had failed the first time. Maybe he had been silent for too long. But now he was here, and he would keep showing up, even if it meant rebuilding everything from dust. The following Monday morning was unusually warm for spring. A golden haze filtered through the clouds, casting a soft glow across the streets as Julian walked toward the school with Nora's hand clasped firmly in his. She wore a pale yellow dress with embroidered flowers and a hairband that sparkled in the sunlight. Her tiny backpack bounced with every step, filled with hand-drawn charts, a snack pack, and a notebook she insisted on carrying herself. Today was Inspiration Day at her school, and Julian had agreed to speak to her class as the person she had chosen to present. He had spent the night before nervously jotting notes on an index card, unsure if he should talk about his work or something deeper. In the end, he tossed the card in the trash. He decided to speak from the heart. At the entrance, Elena knelt down to fix Nora's collar, adjusting the strap of her backpack with the kind of careful touch that parents develop after years of repetition. She looked up at Julian briefly, her eyes betraying a flicker of nervousness. "You don't have to say anything fancy," she said. "Just be real. That's all they need." Julian nodded. "I can do real." Nora took both their hands and pulled them forward. "Come on, we're going to be late for the big part." The classroom was a lively mix of color, motion, and voices. Walls were covered in alphabet murals, glitter stars, and motivational posters with hand-painted rainbows. The children sat on colorful mats near the reading corner while their guests took turns speaking at the front. A police officer had already gone, followed by a woman in scrubs who talked about helping babies. Now it was Nora's turn. She marched to the front, turned toward the class, and pointed proudly to Julian. "This is Julian. He's smart kind and helps people fix stuff. Not just things. Hearts, too." A few children giggled. One boy asked if Julian had ever been on television. Julian smiled politely and walked to the front, standing beside Nora. He looked at the children for a moment before speaking. "I used to think helping people meant having all the answers, that I had to know everything and fix everything. But I learned that sometimes helping means showing up. It means listening. It means being there even when you're scared, especially then." He glanced at Nora, whose small face was tilted up at him with full belief. "I'm lucky because this brilliant girl reminded me what being brave really looks like." There was a short pause, and then the teacher led the children in clapping. Nora beamed with pride. On the walk home, Nora skipped ahead to play on the sidewalk chalk drawings while Julian and Elena lingered behind. "You spoke well," she said. "Thanks," Julian replied, sliding his hands into his coat pockets. "Though I don't know if they understood any of it. They will. Kids hear more than we think, especially when it matters." They reached the corner bakery and paused, tempted by the smell of warm bread and sweet pastries. Elena ducked inside to grab something for lunch while Julian waited outside with Nora, who sat on the bench, legs swinging. "Are you sad?" she asked suddenly. Julian looked at her. "Why would you think that?" "Because your voice gets soft when you talk about hearts, like you're remembering someone you miss." He nodded slowly. "I do miss someone. My sister, your aunt. I miss her too, even if I didn't really know her." "She's proud of you," Julian said, "wherever she is." Nora was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Sometimes I talk to her, at night. I tell her about my robot and the ladybug experiment, and the time I fell in the mud but didn't cry." "What do you think she says back?" "She laughs and tells me to try again." Elena returned with a paper bag in hand and smiled softly at the two of them. They walked back together in silence, the kind that feels like safety. That evening, back in his penthouse overlooking the skyline, Julian stood by the window and watched the city lights flicker on like stars. The letter from Elena sat on his desk beside an old photograph he had dug out of storage, a picture of Claire in a graduation cap, grinning with her arm around a much younger Julian. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone in the apartment. He felt connected. But that peace was short-lived. His phone buzzed on the table. A name flashed across the screen. Raymond Cross. His father. Julian stared at it for a long second before answering. Julian came the voice on the other end, cool and composed. "I hear you've been making new friends. What do you want, Father? I'd like you to come in tomorrow. There's something we need to discuss." "I'm not part of the company anymore," Julian replied. That was your choice. Remember, your name is still on the trust, and the board is asking questions about your recent involvements. Julian tensed. What involvement? Raymond's voice tightened. Let's not play games. I know you've been spending time with the child. And the woman. She has a name. They always do. But names don't change bloodlines. Julian closed his eyes. You knew, didn't you, about Claire? About the letter? There was a long silence on the line. You were grieving, Raymond said finally. I made decisions to protect you. And the family. No, Julian said, his voice cold. You made decisions to protect your own power. You stole the chance for me to know her child. Be careful what ghosts you chase, son. Not all truths bring comfort. Julian hung up without another word. The next morning he arrived at the Cross Industries Tower, a sleek glass and steel fortress nestled in the heart of the financial district. The guards still knew his name. The elevator still recognized his voice. But everything felt different. The building, once a symbol of legacy, now seemed like a mausoleum. He stepped into the boardroom where Raymond waited, flanked by legal counsel and 2 board members. The conversation was short and cold. Julian was warned to be careful about associating with people beneath the Cross standard. A whisper campaign had begun suggesting he was being manipulated by a woman looking for financial gain. She's not after money, Julian said. She didn't even ask for a meeting. Nora called me. That may be, but perception is a currency we cannot afford to lose. Julian stood, voice rising. You buried my sister's death in silence. You intercepted a plea for help. And now you want me to abandon the only piece of her left in this world? No. Raymond narrowed his eyes. Then you force our hand. Julian walked out without looking back. He did not go home that night. Instead, he drove to the edge of the city and parked near a small wooded park where Claire used to take him when they were children. The swings were still there, though rusted, and the oak tree still had the initials she carved with a pocket knife in 6th grade. He sat on the bench and breathed in the scent of wet leaves and memory. He did not have a plan, only a vow. He would not let Nora grow up believing she was someone's shame. He would not let Elena face this pressure alone, and he would not let his father rewrite another page of history. The next morning, he showed up at Elena's apartment, not with flowers or apologies, but with a folder. "What's this?" she asked, opening the door. "My resignation from Cross Industries, and legal steps to begin transferring the family estate into a private trust. For Nora." Elena stared at him. "You? What, I'm not going to let him erase her like he tried to erase Claire. If I have to burn it all down to protect her, I will." Her hands shook slightly as she opened the folder. "Julian, this is huge." He nodded. "So is she." Nora came out of her room just then, still in pajamas, hair messy with sleep. "Are we going somewhere?" she asked. Julian smiled. "Anywhere you want." Elena sat cross-legged on the floor of her living room, with the folder Julian had given her still resting on the coffee table. It was heavy not with paper, but with consequence. The kind of consequence that changed lives in ways people could never unchange. The pages within detailed Julian's official withdrawal from Cross Industries, his transfer of assets into a private trust, and a detailed clause that named Nora as its sole beneficiary. It was a gesture more monumental than any apology, more final than any spoken vow. Julian had not only chosen to step away from his father's legacy, he had chosen a little girl with wide eyes and a sharp brain who had offered him nothing except herself. Elena's heart beat in an uneven rhythm as she tried to understand the depth of what he had done. A man like Julian Cross was not trained to give things away. He had been raised to dominate, to protect the fortress, not to surrender it brick by brick. And yet here he was, surrendering it not as an act of defeat, but as an offering. She reached for the folder again, flipping through the pages with slow fingers, her mind trying to catch up with her heart. Julian had made this decision without asking her permission. That would have infuriated her before. Now it simply stunned her. He had not done it to earn favor or to win anything back. He had done it quietly, cleanly, like a man trying to start over with no interest in using power to prove himself. That evening he returned, not with speeches or explanations, but with 3 takeout boxes, 2 chocolate chip cookies and a miniature science kit for Nora. Elena watched him interact with her daughter with a kind of quiet grace that didn't need announcing. He never made grand declarations. He simply arrived, helped clean up crayons, sat down for puzzles, and when it was time for bedtime stories, he let Nora read to him instead. After she had fallen asleep, her small hand still curled around his sleeve like a lifeline, Julian met Elena on the tiny balcony outside. The city lights shimmered like they were underwater, casting faint reflections in the glass. They stood there for a long time in silence. She finally broke it. I read every word of the documents. He nodded, waiting. You do know that kind of transfer is irreversible, right? Yes. And you're okay with that? I'm more than okay with it, he said softly. It's the first decision I've made in years that actually feels like mine. She turned to face him, her features still partially in shadow. You've changed, Julian. But that doesn't mean this will be easy. I'm not asking for easy, he said. I'm asking for honest. You really want to be part of her life? Elena asked. Even when it gets messy, when she has nightmares or temper tantrums or grows up and slams doors? Yes, he said without hesitation. I want all of it. The bad days, the hard mornings, the lost teeth, the science fairs, the scraped knees, the heartbreaks I can't fix but promise to stay through. She looked at him then fully, as if seeing past every headline and assumption and memory of the boy he once was. She already calls you her robot assistant, you know. He smiled. I've been promoted. Later that night, after Julian had left and Elena stood in the doorway of Nora's room watching her sleep, she whispered something she had not said aloud in years. Claire, you would have liked him this way. The days that followed were quieter but heavier. Raymond Cross was not a man who accepted disobedience. Within 72 hours of Julian's resignation, a story leaked to the press. It claimed Julian had fallen under the influence of a woman with a complicated financial history, and a child whose paternity was unconfirmed. Photographs were used out of context. Comments hinted at mental instability, manipulation, emotional breakdown. Julian did not flinch. He called Elena the moment it aired. You're going to hear things, he said. None of them are true. I know, she replied, but you have to let me handle this too. You don't get to protect me from my own life. The next morning, Elena showed up at a local television studio unannounced and requested to speak on a live morning segment. She stood in front of the camera in a simple blue blouse and jeans, her voice calm but firm. My name is Elena Hart. I am the legal guardian of Nora Hart, daughter of Claire Cross. 6 years ago, Claire died in a car crash that was ruled an accident. Before she passed, she asked me to raise her daughter. I tried to contact Julian Cross through a letter which I now know he never received. I did not pursue contact again because I believed he had made a choice. I was wrong. He never saw that letter. And the man you now see accused in the press is not the man who sat with my daughter night after night helping her build a cardboard robot or taught her how to make grilled cheese without burning the edges. He's the man who stayed, who listens, who protects. That's all I want the world to know. By the time she stepped off the stage, the video had already gone viral. Millions watched it not because it was flashy or dramatic, but because it was real, raw. A woman speaking not to vindicate herself, but to protect the integrity of a child's truth. Across the city, Julian sat watching the feed with tears in his eyes. He did not know how to thank her. He did not know if thank you was even the right word. That evening, Elena arrived at his penthouse with Nora asleep in her arms. She had brought an overnight bag and one of Nora's favorite stuffed animals. She set the bag down in the guest room and looked up at Julian. We're not running anymore. If he wants a fight, he'll have to come find us together. They stayed up late talking about Claire, about the night she found out she was pregnant, about the ways she had changed after the crash, about the names they had once joked about for their children when they were teenagers dreaming of escape. Julian showed Elena the old photograph he had found in storage. Elena pulled out a tiny drawing Nora had made, a family of 3 stick figures holding hands under a sky filled with stars. They placed both items on the mantel, symbols of a new beginning built from what had been lost. The next day, Julian's lawyer called. Raymond had attempted to freeze the trust, but was blocked by a clause Julian had anticipated and reinforced. There would be no undoing what had been set in motion. Cross Industries had lost its heir, but Julian had found something else, something better. That weekend, Julian and Elena took Nora to the park where Claire used to bring Julian as a boy. They brought peanut butter sandwiches, orange slices, and juice boxes. Nora ran ahead laughing, chasing butterflies, a ribbon trailing from her ponytail. Julian watched her, then turned to Elena. "She's going to change the world someday." Elena nodded. "She already has." Julian reached for her hand, then not with grand intent, but with quiet understanding. She did not pull away. They sat together on the bench, watching the girl with the bracelet dance in the sunlight, unaware that her story had already begun to rewrite an entire legacy. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the invitation arrived, slid under Julian's penthouse door in a thick cream-colored envelope sealed with the Cross Industries insignia. He had not spoken to his father since the legal pushback, and despite the silence, he had known something like this was coming. Raymond Cross did not lose control without attempting to reclaim it in some public, calculated fashion. The invitation was for a formal gala celebrating the 25th anniversary of Cross Industries' philanthropic wing, an event hosted annually to present the company as a generous beacon of high society benevolence. Julian had attended every one of them until 5 years ago, when he began to feel increasingly alienated from the narrative. The gala was scheduled for the following Saturday at the Hartwick Grand, an opulent hotel that his father often used for orchestrated optics. Julian held the envelope for a long time before setting it aside on the kitchen counter. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. The invitation wasn't a courtesy. It was a summons. That evening, while Elena folded laundry and Nora practiced her speech for her upcoming science fair, Julian finally spoke. "They want me to come to the gala. The Cross event." Elena looked up, her hands still in motion. "Of course they do. They want a photo, a statement, something to make it look like everything is still intact." "Will you go?" Julian shrugged. "I'm not sure. There's part of me that wants to walk in and remind them I left on my own terms, that I'm not ashamed, that I found something better. And the other part wants to protect Nora from all of it, the whispers, the cameras, the politics." Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You can do both, if you want to." Later that night, after Nora had fallen asleep with her notes still scattered across her blanket and a drawing of her volcano experiment tucked under her pillow, Julian stood by the window and made his decision. He would attend the gala, not to make a scene, not to argue, but to show them with quiet defiance what he now stood for. On the night of the gala, Elena helped him adjust his tie, while Nora sat nearby in a pink hoodie, legs crossed, eating cereal and giving him fashion tips. "You look like a magician," she said, "but one of the good ones, the kind that fixes things." Julian smiled. "That's the goal." Elena smoothed the lapel of his jacket. "You sure you want to do this alone?" "Yes. I need to walk into that room without hiding behind anything. But when I walk out, I'd like to come home to you. You already are home," she said. When Julian arrived at the Hartwick Grand, the lobby shimmered with chandeliers and echoes of polite laughter. Waiters glided through the crowd with silver trays, and a string quartet played near the entrance. Everything was pristine. Everything was curated. The moment he stepped into the ballroom, heads turned. Conversations paused. Flashes went off. And then came the approach. His father, dressed in his signature dark navy suit, moved through the crowd like a tide, calm but purposeful. Julian Raymond said with a nod, "You clean up well." "I wasn't aware I needed cleaning," Julian replied. Raymond smiled, the kind that never reached his eyes. "Thank you for coming. It sends the right message. I'm not here to send your message." "No," Raymond said coolly. "You're here to send your own." A brief silence passed between them. "May I offer you a drink?" Raymond asked, as though nothing had transpired between them. "I'm fine," Julian said. "Actually, I was wondering." Do you remember Claire's first science fair? Raymond blinked. Of course I do. She built a model of the solar system out of yarn and tennis balls, and you left halfway through to take a call from the board. Raymond's expression darkened. It was a critical call. She never forgot that Julian said, "You think this family legacy is about money and buildings and awards?" But Claire's legacy was in how she treated people, in the way she showed up for them. Raymond crossed his arms. And you think this is what she would want? You stepping away from your responsibilities to play house with a child that may not even be yours? She is mine, Julian said quietly. Not because of blood. Because I choose her. The conversation ended there. Julian turned away and walked through the ballroom, pausing at the memorial exhibit where photos of philanthropic projects were displayed. In one corner, hidden among glossy images of hospitals and libraries, was a faded photograph of Claire standing in front of a community garden she had funded in college. It was the only part of the exhibit that felt honest. He stood in front of it for a long time. Just before he left, a woman approached him. She was older, gray-haired, wearing a badge that read, Chair of Youth Outreach. Her voice was soft. "You're Julian Cross, I am. Claire spoke of you often. She believed in you, even when things got complicated." Julian looked at her. "I failed her." "No," the woman said. "You're here. That means something." When he returned home, Elena was waiting on the couch with a blanket draped over her lap and 2 cups of tea on the table. He sat beside her, not saying anything at first. "How was it?" she finally asked. "I told him about Claire. I told him about us. And I stood in front of her picture without flinching. Then you did everything you needed to do." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small silver pin. It had been given to him at the gala as a token of the company's appreciation. He placed it on the table. "Let it gather dust," he said. The next day, Nora won first place in her science fair. Her volcano erupted at exactly the right moment, and the judges were delighted by her handwritten speech about environmental impact and the importance of recycling. Julian and Elena stood in the back, clapping with the kind of quiet pride that doesn't demand recognition. Afterward, they took her out for ice cream and sat on the park bench where Claire used to read aloud under the oak tree. Nora climbed up beside them and pulled out her bracelet. "This was Mommy Claire's right yes," Julian said. Nora looked at it, twisting it on her wrist. "Do you think she would be proud of me?" Julian wrapped his arm around her. "I think she already is." Elena leaned her head against his shoulder, and for a moment all 3 of them were still. There was no past chasing them, no future rushing ahead, just this bench, this moment, this family born not from ease, but from choice. And somewhere beyond words or timelines or legacies, Claire was laughing again. The sun had barely begun to rise over the rooftops when Julian found himself awake, not because of stress or lingering ghosts from the world he had left behind, but because of something quieter and more astonishing. Peace. The kind that was not loud or triumphant, but steady and persistent, like the breath of a sleeping child, or the warmth of someone's hand beside yours. He walked into the kitchen in a plain t-shirt and socks, still adjusting to the humble cadence of this new life. The coffee pot hissed to life, and outside the small apartment window, the sky shifted from pale gray to soft peach. He smiled to himself as he watched a single bird land on the fire escape. It was a quiet morning, but it held promise. Behind him, small footsteps padded into the kitchen. Nora appeared half awake, her hair a halo of soft tangles and her pink pajamas slightly askew. She rubbed her eyes and blinked up at him. "Up. Did you forget to make waffles again?" she asked in mock disappointment. Julian laughed. "You caught me." "You're lucky I like you." She climbed onto the stool and waited, propping her chin in her hands. Julian poured her a glass of orange juice, then opened the cupboard to pull out the waffle mix Elena always used on weekends. He was still learning the rhythm of parenthood, still fumbling through the small rituals, but the learning didn't feel like failing anymore. It felt like living. When Elena entered the kitchen 10 minutes later, still groggy and wrapped in the sweater he loved most on her, she stopped at the sight of them. Nora covered in syrup and flour, Julian holding a wooden spoon and grinning like a kid at summer camp. She didn't say anything. She simply walked forward and kissed Julian on the cheek. "You didn't burn them," she said. Yet he added, "They spent the morning tangled in domestic simplicity." Nora built a cardboard rocket ship out of leftover boxes while Julian helped glue the tail fins. Elena read from her favorite mystery novel aloud in the background, and the three of them paused every so often to offer plot predictions or laugh at the absurdity of the characters. It was a day like any other, which made it extraordinary. That afternoon, Elena received a phone call from the local community center. One of the volunteers had heard about her story and invited her to speak at an upcoming fundraiser for youth programs. At first she hesitated. She had never been someone who liked microphones or large rooms. But Julian gently placed his hand on hers. "You have something they need to hear," he said. "You really think anyone wants to listen to a girl who raised someone else's daughter in a borrowed apartment? I think they want to hear from a woman who gave love when she didn't have to, who stayed when she could have walked away, who saved 2 lives, not 1. She looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. "Okay, I'll do it." The following week they walked into the community center together. The room was filled with folding chairs and plastic cups of lemonade. The crowd was modest, but Elena didn't falter. She stood at the front with Nora by her side and began to speak. "I was 21 when I became a mother. Not because I planned it, but because I promised someone I loved that I would protect what mattered most to her. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have a plan or a degree or even a stable income. But I had one little girl with wide eyes and more questions than the universe had answers. So I stayed. I listened. I learned." The audience leaned in. She had this bracelet, tiny and gold, the kind of thing a child doesn't usually wear. But it meant something to her, and it meant something to me. Because it reminded me that love doesn't always come with blood or legal documents. Sometimes it comes with promises, with presence, with a stubborn refusal to let someone face the world alone. She paused, her eyes meeting Julian's in the crowd. And then years later, someone showed up, not with apologies, but with actions, not with flowers, but with waffles. And suddenly we were not surviving anymore. We were living, together. There was a long moment of silence, then applause, genuine and full. Julian stood in the back with tears in his eyes, his arms crossed, his pride barely contained. After the event, parents came to speak with Elena. Children asked Nora about her volcano. People offered their thanks, their stories, their own memories of loved ones who had saved them in ways the world never noticed. That night they sat together on the rooftop of Julian's apartment building. The city buzzed below, but above them the stars blinked in quiet solidarity. "I want to start something," Elena said, resting her head on his shoulder. "A foundation, maybe. Something for guardians like me. For women raising children who aren't technically theirs but love them like they are. A place where they can find resources, mentorship, even just someone to listen." Julian reached for her hand. "Then let's build it. From the ground up." Over the following months, they did exactly that. They launched the Claire Heart Initiative, named after the woman whose love had stitched their fractured lives together. It offered support to single guardians, emergency housing, legal aid for custody cases, and therapy for children in non-traditional families. Julian used his contacts not for power, but for purpose. Elena led the vision. Nora became the honorary co-founder and proudly wore a name badge at every event. As the initiative grew, so did their life together. They moved into a small home just outside the city, one with creaky stairs and a sunroom that Nora claimed as her personal lab. They adopted a rescue dog named Pixel. Julian learned how to make lasagna without starting a small kitchen fire. And one quiet Sunday morning, while Elena planted marigolds in the garden and Nora chased Pixel around the yard, Julian knelt in the grass and held out a velvet box. Elena turned around slowly. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her knees were covered in dirt, and he had never seen anything more beautiful. "I'm not asking you to say yes because it's expected," he said. "I'm asking because I want every morning to start with waffles and syrup on the floor, every night to end with your voice in the next room. I want to be the man who never walks away again." She didn't answer right away. She stepped closer, looked him in the eyes. "You already are," she whispered. Then she kissed him and said yes. The wedding was small, just family and a few close friends. Nora wore a white dress and gave a speech that made everyone cry, including the photographer. And when it came time for the vows, Julian didn't read from a paper. He spoke from the life they had lived. "I never knew how much I had until I met you," he said. "And then when I thought I had lost everything, you gave me something better. A home, a reason, a daughter, a future." Elena wiped a tear and said, "I never thought I'd have someone who showed up and stayed. But you came with coffee and glue sticks, and you never stopped choosing us. I'll choose you too. Every day." Years passed, seasons changed, the city evolved, but their story remained. Not because it was dramatic or public or filled with headlines, but because it was real, quiet, constant. A love built not on perfection, but persistence. And on one particular morning, as Nora packed for her first college orientation trip, and Julian stood awkwardly in the driveway holding a checklist while Elena handed her a lunchbox, the girl with the bracelet turned back to look at them. Her eyes were still curious, her heart still wide open. "You guys did okay," she said with a grin, for two clueless adults. Then she hugged them, got into the car, and drove off toward the future they had all built together. Back on the porch, Julian held Elena's hand. "She'll be okay," Elena whispered. "She's always been okay," Julian said. "She just needed us to remember who she came from." And somewhere far beyond words or time or cities that never sleep, Claire Hart was smiling. Because love, when planted deep and watered with patience, never dies. It grows, stronger than grief, brighter than legacy, and more beautiful than anyone ever expects. If this story moved you even half as much as it moved us, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever had someone in your life who showed up and stayed no matter how late, share this with them. Because sometimes the family we build is even stronger than the one we're born into. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that restore your faith in love, second chances, and the power of quiet courage.